Okay, how lovely to be here. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Faith Gibson. I'm a children's nurse, children's cancer nurse, and I am an academic. And I work at Great Ormond Street Hospital. I've been there for some time, and at the University of Surrey. So I have a joint appointment between both of those places, and I've been part of a small part of pulling this exhibition together, and it's very exciting. I hope you've all had a chance to go down and see it. So my job tonight is to chair the session. How lovely is that? And my job is to keep some people to time and to give you a bit of housekeeping and some factual information. Which is good. But I thought, first of all, I'd start us off by asking in the room, how many people in the room is a children's nurse? See, it started already. Correcting me. Yeah. Is now. Good English. Is now. Was. Is another kind of nurse? Great. And not a nurse at all. Fabulous. How lovely is that? So a really nice mix. So welcome everybody. And these exhibitions are just fabulous. I wanted to say that, and they didn't ask me to say that, but I love these exhibitions, and they really are telling a lovely, lovely story. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, which I have to do. My bit of housekeeping is to tell you that here, we're not expecting a fire alarm test. If it does sound, we'll make our way outside the building. Nearest fire exit is to your left. The muster point, I love that word, the muster point is inside Cavendish Square. The toilets, I'm sure you've all found them by now. There's some out there, but there's also some downstairs. That's for those in person. And we also have some people joining us via Zoom. I forgot to ask, do we know how many people are joining us? 47, how lovely. 47 people are joining us via Zoom. And this is obviously online. And they will be able to participate in the same way as you will participate. So they'll be able to put their questions into the Zoom chat. If they get a problem with that, then they can let us know and we can read them out for them. Obviously, I'm presuming they're not expecting any fire alarms wherever they are, and they'll know where their fire exits are. So I won't be helping all those people online. But welcome, everybody. So we have a series of excellent talks for you this evening from people who have been in the field for a very long time. In the nicest possible way, I meant that. And have a lot of history to share with us, which is lovely. I, for one, have been very lucky to be part of the Royal College of Nursing for a long time and part of the Children's Cancer Forum, and so been very much part of shaping what it looks like and shaping education and shaping practice, as have our expert speakers. So we're going to start off tonight, unless I missed anything. Was there anything? Anybody? No, we're all good. So we're going to start off tonight by hearing from Alan Glasper, who's down here. And I've got a little bit of, well, obviously it's a lot of blur because he's done an awful lot of things. But Alan writes extensively on the subject of children's nursing, edited contemporary texts, published an awful lot of information that some of us will read, I'm sure. He'll be speaking to us tonight about the history of children and young people's nursing, but I'm sure he's going to say an awful lot more than that, but I think that sets us in quite nicely. And as I've said already, I am going to be keeping people to time, and I am so looking forward to keeping Alan Glasper to time. I have to say that has been exciting me all day. So I will be giving him a nudge if he runs over time. Yeah? Okay, thank you very much. I'd like you to welcome Alan to the stage. Thank you, Alan.
Well, thank you for those kind words, and I'll try not to overstep the mark. Press the green button. Okay, so this is a very brief perspective of the history of children's nursing. It's important to remember that for children in the UK during the 18th and 19th century, life was pretty grim. There was hardly any medical care to speak of until Dr. Charles West founded a hospital in a house in Great Ormond Street in London. Prior to 1852, the only healthcare facilities available were the dispensaries, and this was a movement started by George Armstrong, and the first of these opened in 1769 near modern-day Red Square. Interestingly enough, Armstrong himself was opposed to children being in hospital. He was opposed to inpatient facilities, and he famously says, "If you take a sick child away from its parents, you break its heart immediately." So let's move on to Charles West. There's no doubt that his contribution to the development of contemporary paediatrics and to children's nursing was crucial and very significant. In context, I have to say this because we might have some people from Ireland, the Hospital for Sick Children was not the first children's hospital in Great Britain. That is attributed to the Hospital for Children in Dublin. And in 1838, Dr. West travelled to Dublin where he visited the hospital, and this may have inspired him to actually want to build and open a hospital in London, particularly when you consider at the time London was probably the premier city in the world. Despite his later reputation as a somewhat cold person, at least with adults, he began a charm offensive among rich and influential people, such as Charles Dickens, to secure funding for what would become London's first children's hospital. And this prompted a revolution with the growth of children's hospitals right across the United Kingdom. So later other hospitals opened, such as the Evelina and Sheffield Children's Hospital, for example. On the 14th of February 1852, the hospital opened its doors for the first time, and in the same year, Charles West wrote his first textbook on caring for sick children, entitled How to Nurse Sick Children. Charles West is widely regarded as the father of paediatrics, and this is an early image of West at the bedside of a child. Catherine Jane Wood, one of the famous matrons, wrote that there is no more touching sight than to see Dr. West making his rounds. The little patients welcomed him as their friend, and the fractious or frightened child could not long resist the magic of his smile or the winning gentleness of his manner. If West initiated family-centred care, it was short-lived. Fears of parental-borne infection and fomites gradually squeezed out lay care as Florence Nightingale's influence on hospital design and operating codes began to be applied universally across all hospitals. If you look at this particular photograph, one of my favourites, this is Goldsmith Ward at Great Ormond Street Hospital before 1898, and you can see it's totally devoid of parents and other carers. There are nurses in the background and doctors, but no primary carers. Ditto with Alexandra Ward, this photograph taken in the late 19th century, and again you can see this is Christmas time. There's a Christmas tree in the ward, but there are no parents. The initial aims of the Hospital for Sick Children when it opened were the medical and surgical treatment of poor children, the attainment of knowledge regarding diseases of children, and the training of children's nurses, although the formal school wasn't open until 1878. Mrs. Wiley was the first matron at Great Ormond Street. She was appointed in December 1851. She paid special attention to securing respectable young women as nurses. She resigned in 1855 after a series of disputes with medical officers, and that occurred reasonably frequently over the years, with other matrons having to leave. So the growth of the Children's Hospital subsequent to the opening of Great Ormond Street include Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, 1855, Edinburgh Children's Hospital, 1860, notably Sunderland Children's Hospital, 1910, where I was a patient in 1966. Southampton Children's Hospital, we've got some people from Southampton, founded in 1900. This is one of my favourite photographs. nurses in the post-war period collecting for the Southampton Children's Hospital. Going back to Nightingale, the fear of infection and the growing professionalism of the nursing profession begins to erode lay care. And we have to remember that Nightingale's primary mission was the training of adult nurses. You can see this in Great Ormond Street's regulations of inpatients, where visiting was only on a Sunday for an hour and a half. That's the only time that parents could visit. This is a nice photograph, very typical children's nurse caring for a child during the Christmas period and offering Christmas presents. Not the same without your parents, is it? Note the fireplace in the ward, as nurses had to clean and stoke it with coal, although that was sometime prior to my starting. Nightingale corresponded with Charles West in letters, and they corresponded on the optimum way to care for children. However, she was an opponent of his initiative and believed that children should not be in hospital wards. Despite that, in her notes in nursing, she famously writes, "Children, they're affected by the same things as adults, but much more quickly and seriously." So the first Nightingale schools in nursing concentrated on adult care, with the first one opening in 1860 at St Thomas's Hospital in London. The battle by 19th century children's nurses for a professional recordable qualification was protracted and difficult. The fight for registration went on for a number of years. Nightingale herself opposed state registration, and hence it was effectively delayed until after her death. The baton was then picked up by Ethel Bedford Fenwick, the founder of the British Nurses Association, but her plans for a nursing register didn't include children's nurses, despite the fact that she herself had trained at Nottingham Children's Hospital as a probationer nurse. And here we have the evidence for that. She was the very first nurse on the register, General Nursing Council number 1, and she continued to, for reasons best known to herself, not to actually want children's nurses on the proposed register. So a number of hospitals got together, the Hospital for Sick Children, Queen's Hospital, Evelina, etc., and they all sent a petition to the Privy Council of the King opposing her British Nurses Association petition for a supplementary register that did not include children's nurses. Paradoxically, she was helped in her battle for registration by Catherine Jane Wood, one of the Hospital of Sick Children's most famous matrons, who famously says, "Sick children require special nursing and sick children's nurses require special training." True then as it is today. Royal patronage has always helped children's nurses, and a good coup for children's nursing occurred when the Princess Royal, think of Downton Abbey movie, you've all seen that, have you? Yes, and you remember that Princess Mary was in that movie. She became a probationer at the Hospital for Sick Children in 1918. She never qualified as a nurse, but she was a good role model. That continued right throughout the 20th century. You've got the Queen Mother there in the 1930s. You've got Diana in the 1980s. Princess Tishai of Ethiopia trained as a children's nurse at Great Ormond Street and qualified in 1939. Sadly, she died in Ethiopia in 1942 from a hemorrhage during childbirth. Then, of course, we've got a visit by the former Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, in 1852. And today, the Duchess of Cambridge is the patron of Evelina Children's Hospital in London. Registration was finally achieved when the Minister for Health introduced his own bill for state registration of nurses, and he included children's nurses on that. The Act was passed in December 1919, and 2 nurses out of the 16 who were appointed were children's nurses. First nurse to register as a children's nurse was Evelyn Margaret Hughes, and she registered in 1921. Agnes Mary Coulton, RSCN number 96, who trained at the Infirmary for Children in Liverpool, She registered on April the 21st, 1922, and she comes back later as a very important person in the history of children's nursing, because she was a key figure in the fight for registration, and she worked at what we now know as Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Hackney. This is an interesting slide. Look at the number of children's nurses out of the total who were eligible to vote in the first election, 191, 1.75% of the total, and the total were only 12,100 nurses. By 2020, there were 724,516 nurses on the register, of which 53,539 were children's nurses, 7.3% of the workforce. Still not enough. After 1919, the struggle to protect the direct entry children's nursing began to hot up, because both the Royal College of Nursing and others believed that children's nursing was best suited to a specialist area, best suited to be a post-registration qualification. So the matrons of the sick children's hospitals formed an association, the Association of Sick Children's Hospital Nurses, which later became the ABPN in 1953. This association worked on the principle that children's trained nurses should nurse sick children. And Agnes Colton was elected as its first president and chairman. I'm afraid to say that the RCN continued to seek to abolish the direct entry RSCN course, and they employed Lord Horder to conduct an investigation, and he recommended that children's nursing become a post-registration qualification. But the threat of Horder galvanised the sick children's hospital nurses towards a protectionist lobby, but damage was done. The association tried to get the help of Sir Alan Moncrieff, a very famous paediatrician, and he gave a paper at the RCN called The Future of Nursing of Sick Children, and it was partially to mitigate the effect of Horder's report. And the thrust of his lecture was that paediatric nursing is not a speciality, but general care at a special age period, and this has stood the test of time. Interestingly enough, as World War II continued, children's nurses carried on regardless and evacuated sick children from war-torn hospitals when necessary. But the registered sick children's nursing qualification was in decline. And by the time the qualification was in decline, the evidence that children's nurses were effective was beginning to grow. There's a reference in the exhibition to the Platt Report of 1959, did a lot to augment and encourage children's nursing, but it also recommended that ward sisters who worked in children's units must have an SRN qualification. It was the final nail in the coffin of the direct entry 3-year RSCN course everywhere but in Scotland. Getting beyond a staff nurse was very, very difficult if you had a single RSCN qualification. So many went on to do SRN training. But some hospitals introduced a 4-year combined SRN RSCN course, with the first of these commencing in 1954 at the Hospital for Sick Children. This dual qualification course proved very popular, but it was only ever for small numbers. In 1964, the direct entry RSCN qualification course was abolished at the Hospital for Sick Children and was gradually phased out all over England. And it was kept in Northern Ireland until 1978, and only Scotland retained it until the advent of Project 2000. To secure enough nurses, children's hospitals introduced a 13-month post-registration course. Today, funding for adult nurses to retrain as children's nurses is almost non-existent, and it's a workforce disaster waiting to happen. I thought I'd just show you this. This is me in 1974 with 3 fellow students undertaking an innovatory 2-year training programme leading to RSCN and London University Diploma in Nursing. So, For 25 years, quarter of a century, the RSCN programme was not available in England. Fortunately, Sheila Barlow, who are not with us tonight, but she became a member of the UKCC, the forerunner of today's NMC, and vice chair of the Project 2000 Working Party. It was because of Sheila's work and insistence that the Project 2000 initiative must include direct entry children's nursing that we have a discrete children's nursing programme today. So this was introduced in 1989 as part of the Project 2000 initiative, but was it safe? Well, the future of nurse education and child field of practice is still being debated today, but is it safe? It is safe for the moment, we hope. We know that children need to be cared for by children's nurses. Does it have a future? Yes, it does. The art and science of children's nursing is developing, not least because of some of our academics here today. Recruitment to pre-registration child field of courses remains high, with 8 applicants per place. More children's nurses continue to be needed, but how can we increase the volume of children's nursing in practice? Perhaps we should adopt the strategy used previously to allow enrolled nurses to convert to full registration. Finally, let's remember that today's children's nurses stand on the shoulders of giants, some of many who have punched above their weight. Dame Elizabeth Fradd, Professor Judith Ellis, Dame Angela Horsley, Professor Bernie Carter, Catherine J. Wood, Professor Tony Long, Jill McEwen, Margaret Duncombe, Sheila Barlow, Barbara Weller. I could name many more names, but today's children's nurses need to recognise that much work has been done in enhancing their career today. If you want more history, you can go to my textbook of the 3rd edition, and there's a good website there with lots and lots of photographs, or you can read the chapter. Thank you very much indeed. Was I on time? Whew.
Thank you. Have we got some questions? We've got a few minutes for questions. I'm sure Alan would welcome some questions. I've got thank you. And it's really helpful if you say who you are and maybe where you work, that's quite helpful, and then your question.
Alan, thanks ever so much. Hi, I'm Kath Evans. I'm a children's nurse. I'm really delighted to be here. A brilliant tour through a really rich history of children's nursing, and great to hear so many shout-outs for really prominent children's nurses who have absolutely led the way and influenced. One of the things that always challenges me is the missing element within that with regard to children's mental health. We seem to have forgotten that. Who's caring for our children with their mental health needs? And is this something that we really need to think about as we go forward now and build on the history? So many times when I go out to children's mental health units, they're being cared for by adult-trained RMNs. I think we've missed a trick here.
Well, I can only agree with you, and I'm very pleased that some universities now run dual qualification with children's nursing and mental health nursing. They're very, very popular, oversubscribed. And let's hope that more universities offer those courses.
I wanted to ask a question. You gave us the first children's nurse on the register, female. When was the first male? Do you know that?
I was number 4.
Oh, Who were the 3 runners before you?
I don't know. But,
you don't know? Okay. Because, of course, male nurses were registered much later than female nurses. So
yes.
I was just wondering about that.
Yeah.
Number 4. Wow.
I think, I'm not going to put my life on it, but there weren't very many male children's nurses really until the 70s. I always remember when I first started at Great Ormond Street, and I worked on Ward 4CD, and the ward sister thought I was very, very strange.
Sue. Oh, say who you are.
Suba, a very long retired children's nurse. I find it a little sad, Alan, that you've not mentioned, as particularly as we're in the premises here, the Royal College of Nursing work. The Project 2000 report that college sent in was very strong on the importance of having a separate part of children's nursing. Faith, who stands beside you, and Alison beside me, were founder members of the Paediatric Oncology Group. We used to have about 20 groups, all the conferences, the first degree in children's nursing, the first journal of children's nursing. I think it's a little sad that you haven't mentioned the important role of the RCN.
Only it's purely because of time, Sue. I mean, as you know, I was a member myself of the organisation, so I can only agree with you.
Can I ask another question?
You can.
Is that all right? I'm just thinking, I guess you gave a great case for why we should. There's often a question of should it continue, but what is the evidence? Is there enough evidence? Is the evidence strong enough? We believe it's the right thing. I believe it's the right thing. But when we talk about evidence and supporting it with evidence, do we have that evidence, do you think?
I think it's growing. I mean, I was speaking to a colleague earlier and we were talking about nurses in America, children's nurses from very well-known hospitals such as Boston Children's Hospital. I mean, they have a generic nurse, and nurses who go to work with children subsequently undergo in-house training. I wouldn't want to say that their nurses are inferior to our nurses, but our own history has always favoured nurses who specialise, if you like, in age-appropriate caring facilities. I mean, that's why we've got sub-branches of children's nursing. We've got neonatal nurses, we've got children's cancer nurses, children's mental health nurses. It seems to be a model that works, but we must admit that it's a model which is not universally applied across the world.
Any other questions from the floor for Alan? Did we have any questions online?
No, there's just one comment saying we don't know who the first male children's nurse registrant was. We've been looking. Oh, and then another comment's just come in. Thank you, Alan. I'm a big fan of your textbooks. They're articulated well to care for CYP. I was trained as an adult nurse and then did my master's in children's nursing. I'm a course lead in children's nursing programme, and I must say the direct entry children's nursing course is definitely required to meet the needs of CYP. I think the future is bright with dual field registration.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thank you. Thank you so much. Already mentioned is our next speaker, and that's Professor Bernie Carter, who works at Edge Hill University. She's going to say a little bit more about herself. But actually today, the focus of her talk is going to be talking about the Association of British Paediatric Nursing and talking a little bit about her career as well. So following on from Alan, thank you very much, Bernie.
Apparently I'm a giant. I don't feel like a giant, I feel slightly nervous, but there you go. I'd like to mention that my preliminary training school tutor is in the audience, Leslie Robertson, and one of the people that prepared me for final exams has just disappeared out the door, Alan Glasper. So if I'm rubbish, they're kind of like part of the co-production of that. So there you go. I don't often talk about me and my career, but that's what I was asked about. If I talk about my career, if I imagine what it was like back in the dark ages when I decided I was going to become a nurse, I had no idea what children's nursing was really about. I definitely would have failed the interview should I have been, should I be doing an interview today. But somebody obviously saw something worthwhile in me. And I had no idea that I would end up being the sort of nurse that I am. But the really exciting and absolutely, completely brilliant thing about children's nursing is that you can do so many brilliant things call yourself a children's nurse. You can be a manager, a leader, a researcher, you can be a practitioner, you can be a zillion different things. There wasn't, that vista wasn't there when I first started, but I'm very glad that it's part of it. Anybody that knows me knows that my nose is nearly always in a book. I read tons, not just academic stuff, although I read my fair share of that. I also read a lot of novels and science fiction. So here we have the ABPN Constitution, or the original Blue Book, spinning through space like a TARDIS, because I absolutely believe that when I started children's nursing, I kind of stepped into the children's nursing TARDIS, and I spun out on strange new worlds where I never expected. I haven't actually met anybody that I know is definitely an alien, but I have met many brilliant, spectacular, and different people that I would never expect to have met. So, a motto that was on a table when I was at a conference in South Africa. It said, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that I'm here because I've gone together and I've been supported by brilliant mentors and people. I'm still excited when I come into the Royal College of Nursing. I've been to many, many meetings there and kind of like talked about things that are really important. And along with all the other colleagues that I've worked with, the children, the parents, the families, the people in lots of different disciplines. I've worked with drama teachers, I've worked with artists, I've worked with illustrators, geographers. If basically you meet me, I'll probably end up working with you or extracting something from you in a nice way. Not like a Borg or anything like that. So what we're going to do in this presentation is go through a number of decades, and I'll go fairly fast through them. I had to pick bits to talk about because, a bit like Alan, I could probably talk for a long time. I'm talking here because I am president of the Association of British Paediatric Nurses, and I get a medal. The only other medal I've got is from a very bad triathlon I did a number of years ago. So this is a medal that I got for being president of the association, which is one of the reasons that I'm here today. And the association goes all the way back to 1938, which predates me, not by much, but it does predate me. When some of the matrons of the children's hospitals met because they were concerned about children's nursing. And this is one of the things, if you're a children's nursing, there is a history of concern, a history of activism, a history of fighting for what we believe is intrinsic and true, and we need to hold on to. And if you leave today, just go out holding children's nursing really tight and being prepared to fight nicely, not with punches, but kind of like with ideas and thoughts. 2 months after they first met, 79 ladies attended the first meeting of the Association of Sick Children's Hospital Nurses. And the principle was that children's trained nurses should nurse the sick child. That holds true then, it holds true now. And our constitution, which has been updated many, many times, was in a small blue booklet. And our history honours that first blue constitution, and is kind of the first edition of the history book was actually done in blue. And all of our members get issued with a constitution. It's now done by email, but that's okay. I've gone through the blue book picking out things that were important. We know that placements are difficult to find today. One of the reasons in the 1940s was that the hospitals had been bombed and there were not enough wards for children nurses to actually have placements on. So they dropped the number of children's nurses. And each time we get kind of like a hiccup, kind of children's nursing goes under threat, and we have to sort of fight to get back to where we were in a way. Some of the things that we fought in the 1940s was that if you were an RSCN taking general training, you were paid at a lower rate than SRNs doing children's nursing training. So kind of like the inequalities and sort of like the lack of appreciation was really, really evident. So the ABPN decided that was a pretty rubbish thing to happen, and they took it up with the Ministry of Health. There were some real feisty ladies in the early days. There was a report in the 1950s on the Working Party on recruitment and training of nurses, and again there was a fight because the feelings of the ABPN committee was that children's beds should be in separate units under the supervision of trained children's nurses in general hospitals. There were lots of adverts at that time saying that more or less anybody could come in and look after children, and kind of that was great. 1953, we changed our name to the Association of British Paediatric Nurses. Some of our new starters are not entirely sure what a paediatric nurse is. I trained as a registered sick children's nurse. I've never seen myself as a paediatric nurse because that sort of sounds medical. We're talking about whether or not we change the name again. It was a brilliant decade because I was born. And this is me, and there's a half-nibbled Farley's rusk somewhere near my feet, which I'm not entirely sure is hygienic. I have to take that up with my mum. 1960s. The ABPN was represented on the Education Committee of the GNC, the General Nursing Council, and the ABPN lobbied for the continuation of the 3-year sick children's training. That was something that we lobbied for a lot, but as Alan has said, we lost it. And I can't remember quite why I looked so disgruntled dressed up in a children's nurse. I had no intention of becoming a children's nurse at this age. And I still don't like having my photograph taken. And that's the sort of picture that you tend to get if you force me to have a picture taken. 1970s, there'd been a report on the facilities for children in hospital. You saw some of the dearth of facilities in children's hospitals from Alan's talk. And in 1974, the ABPN, this is children's nurses, invited people from other disciplines, so doctors and other folks, to come along and work out whether or not we'd made any progress. And the decision of that conference was that a great deal remained to be done. I chose my training hospital, and I'm not going to look at Leslie when I say this. I'd heard of it from last term in Mallory Towers, because Mary Lou decided she was going there, and she was the quiet, good kid in Mallory Towers. And it also was fairly near where I lived. And when you look at the set that I trained with, I was October 76, this was the size of a set. So you kind of knew each other pretty well. You held each other's backs. And that was one of the things that I think helped us survive training and things like that. And I was highly advised by my headmistress not to go into children's nursing because it would amount to nothing, not to go into nursing because it wasn't really a good career for somebody that might have been sort of vaguely academically able. And I was kind of encouraged to put in an UCA form, which was the thing you had to do then to go to university. In my first year, they let me take 2 children out to Corham's Fields, which was kind of like the little park opposite Great Ormond Street. And I look at that and I go like, how unsafe was that? The little boy that you can't see, because I don't think I haven't got permission for this photograph to be showing that particular child, lay down on the zebra crossing and refused to get up. And I'm just stood there in my uniform going like, please, God help me, I don't know what to do. However, I survived and flourished as a nurse, and I stayed at Great Ormond Street for a short time. This is me with a picture of a child that we do have, I do have permission to use. In terms of the ABPN, the Nurse Education Group was created. It was a lobbying group. It worked alongside, although there's always been a little bit of politics between the ABPN and the RCN, we've kind of worked together. We've kind of like looked after ourselves and worked together, because the only way that we can protect children's nursing and make things better is that kind of collaboration. I decided that I was going to head off north, so I got as far as Oxford, was there for a little while, headed up further north, Manchester and Leeds, and I worked in children's neonatal, children's ICU and neonatal ICU. And then for some reason, I have got no idea, because I knew that I was never ever going to be a teacher. I got a first teaching job at Alderhay. I went for the job of ICU nurse teacher, and they decided that I wasn't ready for that, so I became a teacher and started flapping acetates and things like that around. Meantime, I decided I was going to do I'd got loads of questions. I decided I was going to do my nursing studies degree, and I did that part-time whilst working as a full-time as a sister on children's intensive care. And back in those days, you kind of funded yourself and you didn't ask for days off, and everybody thought you were a little bit strange doing something like a degree. And the doctors really didn't understand that a nurse could do a degree, so it was reassuring. And the other thing is that so that was that year. Move on to the 1990s, and the thing that the ABPN really put a lot of energy into was developing a journal. There was one journal, but they decided in existence at the time for children's nurses, but this one we aimed to be kind of a bit more, the aim was allegedly to be more academic. We started off in a magazine format. I arrived at the first editorial meeting because I was linked in with this as an editor. And my first meeting, they said that they were going to shut the journal down. So I thought, oh my God, everything I do, there's kind of like a bit of a fight in it. Anyway, we managed to save the journal. We went on to the Journal of Child Healthcare that was published by Greycoats. After a bit of that time, they decided that there wasn't enough money in it because we didn't have enough adverts, or we didn't have any adverts. And eventually Sage took over in the Journal of Child Healthcare, which looks a little bit, we were a bit worried it looked like an IKEA catalogue to begin with. Having decided that teaching wasn't so bad, I got my teaching qualification. It was a busy decade. I got my PhD, and I started working in academia. So I worked at Manchester Met and then UCLan. And most of what I've done is teach quite a lot of research, although quite small scale to begin with, tons of supervision, because as soon as you got a PhD back in those days, basically anybody that was a children's nurse kind of needed you to supervise them. I've done a lot of editing with no training at all, but I think the nuns at school taught me how to put commas in mostly the right space. Ended up writing 4 books, mostly by not intending to do that. The first book I said yes to as I walked down the corridor going on a ski holiday, and a colleague said, "Would you like to edit a book?" "Yes, absolutely, that's fine," and just disappeared down the corridor. When I came back, I realised I was going to get a book contract, which I had no idea about, but I quite like writing, although it still makes me cry. And in between all of this, lobbying for all of those things that were really important, the kind of like the future of children's nursing, and for it is important for us as children's nursing, but more importantly, it's important for children and families, and children, young people and families. 2000 to 2009, there was a lot of activity in the ABPN reaching out to members. There was still a lot of regional and local coordination, coordinating meetings and conferences. Very, very little of that at the moment, but part of that, there's lots of reasons for that. I became a professor of children's nursing at UCLan, which was a bit of a surprise. I've never been ambitious for myself. I've always just been curious, and sometimes if you're getting really curious, you have to take the next step. And then kind of people heard about me, and I became a visiting professor in Tasmania and New Zealand. So I had a couple of trips out there, which was, again, absolutely terrifying, and they're great. They have really good afternoon teas. If you ever get an invitation there, they do afternoon tea really well. The thing that was most phenomenal for me is I got invited on no pay and no time to become the director of the Children's Nursing Research Unit at Alderhay, which was fabulous. So the idea was to build research capacity and capability amongst children's nurses working at Alderhay. It's still going on. There's lots of good things that came from that, but the challenge for nursing research, for children's nursing, is we're never seen quite as being important as medical-driven research. So I love my medical colleagues. I'm now doing lots and lots of work with medical colleagues, but we still have to sort of jump higher and be taller and shout louder to get noticed. I was extraordinarily lucky to be made a Fellow of the Royal College of Nursing. They gave me another medal. I'm collecting medals. There you go. That's this medal. And that was a really enormous thing, because that's something that is actually supported by your peers. So you feel like you've kind of arrived. And then it's a bit like when you become your first day as a staff nurse, you go like, okay, I've arrived, but I've got no idea what to do that. And everybody kind of goes a bit imposter syndrome-y. Tons of research, literally tons of supervision for people's PhDs, and very little sleep. And I've put a couple of papers in that I was involved with that were to do with children's pain, because if something makes my heart beat faster. It's management of children's pain and trying to improve the way that we actually sort of manage that. And there were loads, if I've done anything methodologically in children's nursing research, it's to do with arts-based approaches. So in the same way that we play and distract, we use play and arts-based approaches to do that. 2010 to 2019, the ABPN continued its activities. There's a whole host of things that we were involved in, producing evidence for various committees. The challenge we have is we can stand up and say it's really important. By my reckoning, within the UK, we don't have a very good evidence base to say why we are so important and what value we actually do add. There's a really great project going on at Plymouth, being driven by Plymouth, that the ABPN is involved with. There'll be representation from the RCN and a lot of both practitioners who are absolutely core and children's nursing academics are part of that. So we're still fighting some of the same fights that we were fighting back in 1937. I decided I needed to change, having been at Edgehill for, I think, 16 years. So I moved to Edgehill University, which is fantastic, but just a wicked commute. Lots more research, lots more supervision, and lots more writing. Working with absolutely brilliant people all over the place in all sorts of different settings. And again, trying to find more and more innovative ways of not just doing research, but actually disseminating research. So using things like comics and animations, a lot of co-produced stuff. And that co-production was happening a long time before co-production became a term that people use. 2020 to 2023, I had put 2024 on here, it was an error, so I kind of wound it back to 2023. The ABPN is still active. We've put out statements defending the value of field-specific pre-registration training for children's nurses. We're actively involved in various committees. We're linking in at the moment with NHS England. We're running an oral history project at the moment, which I think will complement the great work of the Once Upon a Time work that's been done. We've got a social media expert who worked with me on a previous project who's helping us create YouTube videos and Insta and other stuff that I'm not that great on. I was made president of the Association of British Paediatric Nurses, which is another honour. I'm still researching. I'm still doing work on pain. I've been working with Lucy Bray on the eye support standards that aim to make sure that we're not holding children for clinical procedures. And these now, we've been working with people in, I can't remember, 30 plus different countries. They're being translated into different languages. I'm still kind of like researching and writing. Rachel, who is the smiley person over on the right, has just got her PhD. She's a paediatric specialist physio in Plymouth, and she's done amazing work and managed to do kind of like a trial in the middle of the pandemic. And Rebecca Walker-Becks is doing a great project on children with cerebral palsy and why they fall by actually taking children out into the real world and getting them to explain areas of the world that make walking difficult for them. I'm allegedly trying to retire, but nobody will let me, so that's it. So thank you for listening. I have been saying ABPN, ABPN, ABPN. I am a member of the Royal College of Nursing, and I couldn't have got to where I am without them, so thank them very much for that. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. Questions from the floor for Bernie?
Nobody's going to put their hand up in case I make them work with me.
Bernie, I want to ask you, and that was absolutely brilliant. What would you say to yourself if you were starting children's nursing today?
Go for it, I think. I think I had no idea what children's nursing was about, and I think sometimes we have an idea of what it might be. I kind of imagined it would be quite sweet. I don't think I'd prepared myself for some of the really difficult stuff, because it's not all wonderful and lovely in cuddles. There are some really tough times. And I think I'd say prepare yourself for some difficult times, but it's absolutely worth it. And I think the other thing is, without being snatchy, go for opportunities. Because there were some of the things that have helped me do things are things that I didn't feel completely prepared for. So like editing a book, or, I don't know, doing a PhD or whatever it was. And I think at the time that I was doing it, there weren't very many of my contemporaries who perhaps could have helped me with that. I think the generation that's coming now have got kind of like people of my generation who've been there and done it and can sort of provide a bit of guidance. So I'd say also ask for help. Yeah, so 3 things to your, what one thing would you say?
Thank you. Question from the back.
With all your experience working with children, and at the moment, with all the research also, is there any point your person can tell us about the pediatric community nurse? Because we know that pediatric nurse work especially at hospitals, but
Yeah.
what is going on now, and if there is something that we can do for the community?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, I've deliberately tried for the most of the time not to say where the settings are. I see all children needing our help wherever they are. And children need children's nursing support in many different settings. I was involved in setting up one of the earliest, if not the earliest, children's community nurse training. That was another thing that I was completely unprepared for, because I hadn't done any children's community nurse training. But somebody has to sort of start things off. I think we have to stop seeing children as being... We have to stop thinking of children's nursing as being in settings and thinking that we need to have children's nurses who can move between settings. And we need to value each and every one of those settings. So whether or not it's hospice work, which is desperately short of children's nurses, whether or not it's mental health care, desperately short of children's nursing, children's community nursing, still desperately short of children's nursing, hospital wards, still desperately short of children's nursing. Wherever you look, there's a shortage. And we need to make sure that we're retaining, and there's some evidence suggesting that we're not retaining as many children's nurses now as we have in the past, because there's less, I know the word specialist is not the word we should be, there's less child focus in kind of like in many current curricula that people are doing. And I think, yeah, we need to be where children and parents are. So I would advocate for any and all settings to be made child-friendly and to have child expertise in there.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, do we have any questions from...
Yeah, just one quick question. How can we get children's nurses into primary care, the point of first contact with health services for most children?
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing battle. I genuinely think it's an ongoing battle, and we just have to keep doing that. There are, where we have children's nurses in primary care, there is evidence that they make a difference, but we haven't got kind of like research, bomb-proof research evidence to actually demonstrate this, and I think it's quite tricky to actually do this. One of the things that we're trying to do with the Plymouth project is find where we would get funding to do this, and that's quite tricky because it's kind of still a small field, it's still not necessarily kind of top of everybody's agenda, and mental health, absolutely core, but I think it's taking over some of the conversations that we still need to be having about children's nurses. And I don't see mental health nursing as being separate from children's nursing. I think we need to have a lot more well-being and children's nurses not being worried about nursing children with a mental health challenge issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Kate Pye, who's joining us, who is a Deputy Director for CYP Nursing with NHS England. Deputy Chair of the Association of Chief Children's Nurses, and I'm sure she'll say much more about that because she's actually going to talk about her career as a children's nurse. And welcome, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, you lose your saliva when you get nervous, don't you? So I always need some water. So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me today. This is a very personal journey, and there's no right or wrong way to getting to where you get to in life as a children's nurse, but this is my reflections of my 30 years of my children's nursing. And actually, there's some people in the room that I've known for almost those 30 years, some new faces and some familiar faces. So this is where it all began. So we've talked about this tonight, I was one of the first Project 2000 nurses, so it started in September 89, I was January 1990. That's me at St Mary's Hospital. You can see me, I've got a little cream jumper around my, just in the top left, next to the two guys. In fact, there's five men, just, I don't know why I'm surrounded, but I've got all the men on the left. And actually, it was a difficult experience. There were times where I would say we weren't necessarily made to feel as welcome as especially when we started as first years. There was some disconnect between the traditional routes into nurse training and then also how we were actually treated on the wards. The first picture had a picture of me at Boston Children's Hospital last October. I was lucky to be a Florence Nightingale scholar, and I went to Boston Children's Hospital to visit the services there. Sorry, that was the first picture because it'll come into context in a bit. And so I actually made a decision not to stay within the hospital that I trained in, but I went to Queen Elizabeth's in Hackney. So I was the first registered Project 2000 nurse, I think, that they had over on that site. And I absolutely love that. And even though I have protected the eyes, consent was obtained at the time for the taking of the pictures. So actually, it's almost 30 years ago since I moved to Great Ormond Street. And I think that it was some of the happiest times in my professional career. I think you're a bit of a super sponge at that age, and I was left in charge 6 months after coming into the children's cancer ward. First, I literally got my chemotherapy certificate, and then that was it. I was left in charge of 19 beds up on Lion and Giraffe, and I absolutely loved it, and I made some friends for life in that scenario. Really, really happy times. We were pushed. The ratios were it was kind of a 1-to-6 at times, 1-to-5, 1-to-6 sometimes. So we were pushed as nurses, but actually the training and education that we received during that time, and I was lucky enough to undertake my oncology training. And actually, when I started my journey into nursing, there's always kind of a couple of people that come along that give you some really, really good advice. And I was always going to do my adult nursing and then do the conversion, because isn't that what lots of people did? So I'll do my adult and then I'll go off and do my conversion into children's nursing. And my tutor, I did a BTEC National Diploma in Science and Healthcare, so I did a pre-nursing course instead of doing A-levels, which was a combined course, but I actually got to go out as a 16, 17-year-old into the wards in Nottingham. And she actually said, you know, Kate, if you want to work with children, just go and do your children's training. And I actually hadn't realised until I saw Alan's, and I feel a bit ashamed that I didn't actually realise, and there might be people in the room that don't realise this, but I hadn't realised that actually the RSCN qualification had, the numbers had tailed off to the point that they had, and actually when the Project 2000 came on again. So it just shows you're always learning in these roles, and the history's been really, really interesting. So as you can see, I have my little collar on. I had to take off separately and wash. There's probably a lot of people in this room that can remember that experience. Yes, many, many happy times in that space. In fact, there's someone in the room that probably remembers some of these pictures. So I spent 15 years working in the world of children's cancer. I was never going to leave children's cancer. It's the best specialty in the world. Actually some very, very happy times. This was a point in my career where there was a reconfiguration of children's cancer service across London, and actually this unit was sadly closed. And that was very sad for a lot of people that were working in that sector, but it was managed and services were reconfigured across London. But actually, that was probably, I think, one of the times when I feel personally that we were quite a small team and we bonded really well. And actually, I think the quality and delivery of care that we gave in that scenario was really, really great. I then moved through into to Southampton, actually, to Bristol, sorry, and had a couple of children. And actually, I'm not quite sure why, but I decided to do my master's in the middle of having two very small children. I always wanted to be an advanced nurse practitioner in paediatric oncology, and that was one of my dreams and visions. But sadly, the funding wasn't there to support that in that role. So that was difficult for me. And then I had to reconsider how I was going to, what I wanted to do with my professional career, because the kind of aspirations that I'd had around that role, that wasn't there. So, you know, there's been ups and downs across my professional career, and actually that was one of the times where I was actually, it was difficult because I really wanted to work in that space. So this was my time 2012 through to 2020. I actually applied to become a senior matron at Southampton Children's Hospital, and I was there for 8 years. And actually it was where I learned to also manage adult services as well. So we were on call and we managed 1,200 beds. And when I'd managed a bleep for years and years within paediatric services, but actually when you move into the world of adults and children, it's a very different model. They say +1, -1. I'd be like, what does that mean? I just didn't understand the terminology that they used in an operational setting. Actually, I learned a huge amount in this space. You can see Gary Barlow in the middle up there. Christmas Day, that was with one of my amazing chief nurses at Southampton Children's Hospital, and she's still there. And yes, I did used to hoover everyone's offices, because as the head of nursing, I think, you know, you need to make sure that you do your part and have your part to play in these roles. A couple of things happened in that scenario that I think I'll explain in a second about some other elements. Actually, I think, and we've talked a bit about this tonight, and Bernie's talked a bit about this as well, but actually, I think, and I think I can say this, and I think people will agree in the room, I think the world of children's nursing has changed, and I believe that the children that I cared for and the complexity, I think, is different. I think Kath has raised a perfect point around the mental health concerns that we have currently facing us within our acute settings, but also complexity. In 1975, we had 1 child on home long-term ventilation. We now have 2,500 children in this country on long-term ventilation. And it's lovely to see some of our community nurses here as well today who do all of that complex work. Actually, I think it's not just about complexity. I think it's about social media, and also I do have concerns about how our children's nurses are protected when at times it is difficult and we cannot necessarily have a response. And there's some work, that I'll talk about in a minute, but actually I think the level of social media that has come from some of these very serious cases is something that I think has shifted and changed probably in about the last 5 years, I believe, within our practice. And I think at times we feel unsupported in that space, and it's difficult to know how to have those conversations. So I just wanted to recognise that things have moved and shifted, but I think there's been a couple of particularly high-profile cases recently that have shaken, I think, the world of children's nursing. And I know this is a celebration event tonight, but I'm here to talk about the realities of potentially how it is for some of our amazing, inspirational children's nurses and all nurses who work with children, because they're not just children's nurses. I know we're celebrating that tonight, but it's really important to include those in there. So why children and young people's nursing? Why be a children's nurse? You probably wouldn't realise, but I'm actually gangster granny in the middle of that. So this was a dress-up day at Southampton Children's Hospital. We all had our uniforms, so if there was something going on, we did get changed. But actually, I think this is the joy to me about being a children's nurse. Everybody should have a therapy dog. And I was just saying to someone tonight, we used to have doggy treats in the offices, so when they used to come round because you knew they'd come and call. And actually, this is the joy in children's nursing to me. Some of the things that you can do to make that little bit of difference in everyday life to the children and families that you care for is the reason why I'm a children's nurse. And actually, we worked really, really hard on trying to make some of these really amazing experiences come to fruition. An end-of-life child being able to go for a swim in the hydro pool with 25 people in the pool, those sorts of things, teams pulling together. And for me, the joy of children's nursing is, I think, for me personally, this is what I think it looks like to me personally. And even after 30 years, I find a huge amount of joy in my role, and as a children's nurse, I'm really proud to be a children's nurse. These are a couple of my inspirations. So I currently work for the Chief Nurse of England, Dame Ruth May. She is one of the biggest advocates for children and young people, and actually we have a real voice nationally now with our senior executive team understanding the needs of children and young people. And I think that's why quietly in the background, she is always fighting our corner, whether it's urgent and emergency care, whether it's virtual wards, whether it's elective recovery. She's always there being our spokesperson. I think that's really important to say. The lady in the top is someone in our audience will know, and actually I cared for her and some of the people in this room when she had cancer, and she now then went on to become a children's nurse herself, and she's an absolute inspiration, and I still see her to this day. So these are a couple of my inspirations. So I wanted to talk about what just really quickly was, I was lucky enough, as I say, to do a Florence Nightingale Scholarship, and I asked some senior children's nurse leaders about some of the things that they would want, so what you would recommend, so advice you would give people starting out in their children's nurse leadership journey. So what helped you along that way in your journey? And I think we've probably heard quite a lot of reflections from people, and there's people in this audience that have got huge amounts of experience in this area. But actually, this was some of the things that if you're looking to develop or even just branch out slightly, career angels, secondments 1 to 2 days a week, grabbing every learning opportunity. We talked about being brave and being bold, not necessarily being tied to one specialty, and then looking within your own practice around different opportunities to work on different projects, stretch assignments, shadow and access to board. That's actually quite tricky as a children's nurse because we only have 4 standalone children's hospitals in this country, so therefore your exposure at board can be limited at times. Also, first 100 days, looking at how you find things to change, horizon scanning, academic courses, keep studying, and Bernie's just given us a beautiful example of all of that work that goes on. Keep studying, but make sure that you choose the ones that are right for you and bring you joy. Collaborating, challenge yourself, listen to your heart. Connect-working, that sounds like a bit of terminology, but actually networking and connect-working are things that I've tried to do really trying to bring people across the country together in my role at the moment. So this is where some of the work that we've been doing nationally, I hope this is of interest to you. And I have tried to do, in this role, tried to help support some of the areas that have actually really challenged me in my professional career. So one of the things that I'm really super proud of in here, and Fiona, who was one of our fellows, led on this, is actually the evolution of the conflict platform. So we now have lots of hospitals are working with Medical Mediation Foundation, but we have developed a e-learning module, online interactive module that you can, any nurse, any person who's working within children can actually access. And we now have regional conflict champions. We have nurses and doctors, and they are there to support the rollout of this. I actually think with what's going on at the moment, especially around some of the work that might come out of the Martha's Rule, work that's happening at the moment, I actually think that this conflict platform is something that, we are hoping to do within neonates, but also I think our adult critical care colleagues would be really interested in this. And so it's how we grow this, but that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of this on this slide. We also are we ran a children's nurse leadership programme last year for 20 children's nurses, and that's about being brave and bold, and we have secured funding to run that again for another 30. That's not saying that children's nurses have to be together and they're special, but actually the feedback that we've got from the teams is that that networking and that understanding of the particular pressures that we face as children's nurse leaders, which are nuanced and are particular to our specialty, it's a safe space to share some of that. So that's happening at the moment. We are also running an event on Friday, which is the What Does Good Look Like? So we are hoping to produce a Children and Young People's Nurse Leadership Handbook along the lines of the Matron Handbook and the ward leaders. And that is, we've got an evaluation kind of consultation event on Friday looking at standards and accreditation resources, but also looking at what we want to put into that handbook. We're hoping to run a student nurse conference in March because they are our future. And so that's something that we're also planning. And we've also set up a futures platform, love them or hate them, they are here to stay. And actually that's our forum for connecting professionally. We now have over 500 people that have signed up for that futures platform. And we've also got some working with Professor Jane Code, we've got some of the research work that's going on to there as well. Am I almost out of time? Just want to really briefly say about workforce. So we've had some nurses working regionally looking at children and people's workforce. We have 3,000 vacancies in provider land at the moment. Complexity, mental health, I think it's shifting and changing. Just to reassure people that we are working with the Workforce Training and Education Department in NHS England, trying to map out complexity with the RCPCH to make sure that we are understanding and trying to factor in actually how we start to bridge some of this gap, as people have said, are we training enough children's nurses? Are they in the right place, the dual qualifications? And so I'll stop there because everything else we're doing is on the slide. But thank you.
Thank you, Kate. I think we'll just take one question because it would be unfair not to have a question. Is there one question for Kate? Please, again, just give your name and where you work. That would be really helpful.
Hello, so my name's Sam. I work at the Royal London, actually, as a paediatric LTV CNS.
Oh, hello.
I was wondering, do you think people actually are now realising and actually taking seriously how complex some of our children are these days? And I find some barriers, which is like an ongoing project, but I think that I struggle because of a lot of things kind of getting these children home. So do you think that people do actually appreciate how complex they are in line with adults?
Yeah, I think there's some work going on. So the GIRF team are looking at the LTV pathway, aren't they, at the moment? There's work going on around ethical frameworks as well for long-term ventilation, which has come out of the London region, hasn't it? I believe. Yes, I think it needs to be built upon. I think if we can try and understand some modelling, the RCPCH are trying to do the modelling around complexity, because it's not just the 2,500 that are long-term ventilated, it's all the children on non-invasive ventilation and the children, the complexity of the fact that we are doing the right thing by supporting children through their life course, but actually, long-term conditions as well. So, yes, I think it's a work in progress. I think it's something that we do bang the drum loudly nationally around, and we try to get ourselves into every single working group that's looking at some of these elements. But yeah, I think it's something that we'll continue to build, but we're not anywhere near there yet at the moment. I understand that, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
And our last speaker is a nurse, and I welcome to the platform Molly. And what's lovely to see here is that you've seen a bit of a thread of ensuring that we have ways of communicating and telling stories. And Molly's going to tell us a little bit about her work. So welcome, Molly.
So I'm actually going to start with a few lines of a story. There once was an owl called Dotty, a nurse with a uniform all spotty. She works in the hospital up the hill, looking after all the children who are ill. So now you've met Nurse Dotty, the more important person in this talk, I'll introduce you to myself. My name's Molly Watts, and like Nurse Dottie, and like many of you in the room, I'm a registered children's nurse. I have spent most of my career working in paediatric intensive care, and since about a year and a half ago, have been working as a children's nurse lecturer at Winchester University. But probably the more interesting reason I'm stood here is because I also write and illustrate children's books, mostly around healthcare-based scenarios aimed at alleviating anxiety for children and families and giving information in an age-appropriate manner. So I'm mostly known, especially in Southampton's Children's Hospital, as the nurse who writes the books. So this journey for me started when I worked as a staff nurse in paediatric intensive care. I'd always enjoyed a bit of creativity at work. I'd once made a patient's wheelchair into a unicorn to convince her to get out of bed and spend time in it to promote her ongoing physiotherapy journey. And in PICU, we would give children patient diaries, which we would write messages and fill in when parents weren't there because they were home getting a bit of rest, and also for children to read kind of once they were out of PICU so they could understand the journey that they'd been through. And being someone who had long enjoyed books and poetry and with a little bit of a knack for rhyming, I started writing stories in there for the children I looked after, about the adventures they'd been on in their dreams while they were having their long sleep and about what was happening to them. I also tried to start drawing so that these stories could have some illustrations and not look quite so boring. Well, I loved writing these stories, and more importantly, the children and families loved reading them. So very much encouraged by the nurses I was lucky enough to be working with, I began to start thinking about how I could take this and make it something. Then I had an idea. Wow, I had a doodle of an owl dressed as a nurse whilst I was trying to stay awake for the last 10 minutes of my break on a night shift. I named her Nurse Dottie. This was after a little nurse ragdoll that my mum had given me when I started my nurse training. I used to take her in my bag to my placements to help me feel less nervous. I had a little niece who had a ragdoll herself called Dottie. She discovered mine one day and was really excited. Oh my God, it's Nurse Dottie, and that had stuck with me. I wrote those 4 lines I read to you at the start. I brought an iPad, I brought a drawing app, and Nurse Dottie was born. I started out experimenting on stories about what I knew, the journey of being in PICU or having an operation on your heart. I gave Nurse Dottie what every modern girl has, a Facebook and an Instagram. I also gave her a website. Then a month or so later, COVID hit. Everybody was scared, including when I looked around me, the children in my life. Advice was coming out at the time that you shouldn't give children too much information so that you didn't worry them. But as we all know, children listen and they know so much more than we give them credit for sometimes. Things around us were changing, so post-night shift one morning, sitting on my sofa at home, watching this unfold on the news, I wrote, "Dave the dog is worried about coronavirus." A short, rhyming, illustrated story about Dave the dog in which Nurse Dottie gives him information on what is going on and what he needs to do using the advice that was around at the time. It was initially intended for my 5-year-old nephew, but I wanted to give it to anybody who might find it helpful for their children or even for themselves, because we all needed reassurance too. So I put it on Nurse Dottie's website as a free download and shared it on her social media pages. This is where the power of social media comes in, because over the next few months, and as we went into our first lockdown, it was downloaded across the world over 500,000 times, read in schools and nurseries across the country, and translated into 15 different languages that I know of. This is a map of all the countries where it was downloaded in. As you can see, they weren't such a fan in Greenland, but other than that, pretty good. But this was really a catalyst for me and encouraged me to go forward and work out how I could realistically make a physical book. After much trial and error, I did manage this, and here's a couple of examples up here. And Nurse Dottie's collection has grown from there, either on the back of requests from patients or staff, and also just from a long list of ideas I have. So here's some examples of current books I have, and there's also some physical copies out the back if anybody wanted to have a look. But a personal favourite of mine is the Christmas book. This is a book about how Nurse Dottie saves Christmas by borrowing an ambulance. But what it's really about is how being in hospital at Christmas, you won't be forgotten and Santa will still find you. I did some fundraising to get some of the books printed and was really inspired by how generous the people around me were. The first year I did this, I managed to deliver 377 books to be given out to all the children in hospital Christmas Eve across 7 hospital trusts in the south. another one I just wanted to highlight is the ECMO book. So ECMO, for those of you that haven't come across it before, is a machine that in simple terms takes over the work of the heart and the lungs so that they can have a rest. And children sometimes end up on it after cardiac surgery or after a significant illness. I was approached by the nurse lead for ECMO at PICU in Southampton and asked if I would consider creating a book that could be given to children at ECMO for them and their families to use. The book takes you through the journey of Ernie the elephant, looking at the different members of staff looking after him and the different procedures and equipment he might experience. To be able to access a book with a story so specific to that journey, like is the case in a number of other Nurse Dotty books, has been really well received. The book has grown from something that has been picked up, something that to be used in my local children's hospital, to something that has been picked up and used in a number of other hospitals. The ethos of the books is to take a traditionally scary and potentially complicated scenario like ECMO and make it into something approachable and appropriate for children through the use of rhyme, storytelling and imagery. But the best thing about this journey so far has been seeing and hearing about the impact the stories have had on those that have used and needed them. All the times the books have alleviated anxiety, when they have been used by siblings to understand what's happening to their brother or sister while their parents are away, when they have been taken into school so that children can talk to their friends and classmates about their condition, when they've been used before going for heart surgery to prepare for what to expect, and all the times children have recognised themselves and their own story in the characters. To consolidate some of the feedback I received, I generated a word cloud, and for those of you that haven't used it, the more a word or phrase appears, the bigger it appears on the image. Of course, it was amazing to see Makes a Difference coming out as a common theme, but the one I particularly loved was Great for Little Minds, because helping those minds and the children they belong to, for me, is at the heart of what it means to be a children's nurse. And going from having an idea through to being able to create something that has been so well received by children and families has been an incredible journey. But there is still so much more that Nurse Dotty can do. And like children's nursing, she is forever growing and developing, and I can't wait to see what might be next for her. So in the spirit of celebrating children and young people's nursing, I wanted to leave you with this from Nurse Dotty. Nurse Dotty was asked what it meant to her to be a nurse for children and young people. So many things came to mind, she didn't know if she could say it all. She thought back to all the families she had been able to look after, all the moments she had shared in, many of them had joy and laughter. Some of them were sad, and there were ones she would never forget, but being able to support families in those moments was something she would never regret. There were countless medicines she'd given, and many, many beds she had made. There were books she had read to patients, so many games she had played. Nurse Dotty thought of all the babies she had settled to sleep when parents couldn't be there, and all the children and parents she had sat with just to talk to and to care. She was proud of all the time she had been able to help take away some of their anxiety and fears, and all the time she had been part of making them better, or even just stopping their tears. Because to be trusted to look after her little patients, a greater privilege she could not foresee. A children's nurse, Nurse Dotty knew she was very lucky to be. Thank you.
Thank you. One question we can have, because we do want to make sure people have time for the exhibition.
Carly Whittaker, President at the Paediatric Critical Care Society. Just a comment rather than a question. We are looking as a society to give information to parents and children and young people who have the experience of paediatric critical care. So I will be contacting you to try and... we're very conscious that our website is very professional focused, but we're very sure, like Kate said, the complexity around paediatric critical care and children and young people is growing. And we're trying to meet that knowledge deficit gap. So we'll probably be... We're looking at developing a website and a parent-facing, children and young people-facing website and information site for children and young people. So if we could touch base, that would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the thing is we're very quick sometimes to try and shield children, as we should, but actually information is power, isn't it? So I think the important thing is putting it in a way that they will be able to access and work with. So.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to keep you because if you've not seen the exhibition, a real joy is waiting for you. It is fabulous. And I just wanted to say, in the context of the exhibition, I'm just taking some of Bernie's words, is that we've spent a long time in terms of a history of concern and a history of lobbying. And I don't think that's going to change. And what you see downstairs is exactly that. What has happened over many years, what we've tried to sustain, what we have absolutely been fundamental in changing is children's nurses. And we still have, that work is still to be done. So our history of concern will continue, and our history of lobbying, I'm afraid, will continue too. But the exhibition gives you a good sense of where we've come from, and it also gives you a sense of what's made a difference, and I think it gives you a good sense of where we might go to next. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much to our speakers. It's been a fabulous evening. Thank you so much for all those people who've joined us online. And remember, if you don't get a chance to see the exhibition, if you are online, you have 6 months to come and see it here. So when you're doing your Christmas shopping and Oxford Street just gets far too much, you can just nip into here and be relieved completely by seeing a beautiful exhibition. Thank you so much. Enjoy.